The KGB, while I was with them, shared practically nothing with me. I didn't even know that I was a part of the Directorate S. I had no idea what the structure of the KGB was. But a lot that information I acquired in hindsight, putting pieces together and reading up on on material that described how the KGB operated.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Hope you're ready for another episode of Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. Now, let's dive in. Here's a question for you. For somebody who, we'll get into your backstory. For somebody who was an intelligence asset, they were a spy. Do you ever just stop being a spy? I mean, honestly, how do people know that you're truly who you say you are?
You just got to trust me.
That's a.
All right. Well, there's a little bit of proof here. I passed the lie detector test.
Yeah.
The FBI swears by that thing. Okay, and
Well, the FBI does. It's not allowed in court because it's definitely flawed, but it can give you indications.
Understood. But
Yeah.
the guy who took the test, who administered the test for me, was known to be one of the best in the FBI. Never mind, it's not proof. I understand.
Yeah.
If you live with me long enough, as a friend, as a family member, you know that whatever distrust was part of my existence is completely disappeared. And one other thing I got to tell you, because of the kind of spy that I was, um, I lived in a bubble that had lie written all over the place. But inside that bubble, I was always honest and trustworthy, and I kept my promises.
Yeah.
Because I had to be normal. Okay, I was supposed to be an illegal to blend in to society, and you can't be acting like a spy like the Americans.
No, it was a tongue-in-cheek comment for sure.
I understand. I get the question all the time, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to. I'm explaining this so people understand that my life as a spy was unusual and completely different from most everybody else who is spying.
Oh, for sure. And I'll be honest with you, I hadn't heard the term illegals until earlier this week. Actually, yesterday, I hosted an episode with a journalist who wrote a very large piece about the illegals program kind of becoming unwound in Brazil and them tracking down.
His first name Sean?
It was Michael, I believe.
Oh, interesting. Because the book just came out, written by the first Western journalist, English-speaking journalist who interviewed me, also also wrote about illegals. That's a good read, by the way.
Well, the concept is fascinating. And like you said, you lived a life that was so different than many other people, even those in the intelligence. From what I understand, and I don't have deep knowledge of the agency, but they don't use the model of the illegals. And for the listener, please correct me if I describe this inaccurately, but using the lens of what they were doing in Brazil, they were sourcing legal citizenship documents and basically creating
Yes.
more than a cover story. It was actually a life. They were creating what would
Yes.
be an actual citizen in Brazil. Now,
Yes.
Brazil wasn't necessarily the target. They were
No,
the
it wasn't.
vehicle.
It was
Yeah.
not. It was a staging area.
Yeah, it was the vehicle, and then they would go to the West. But some of these people had been there 3 to 6 years. They all had businesses. Like you said, you were surrounded by a world of lies, but they had to operate inside of that bubble as if they were who they said
Yeah.
they were. I mean,
Yeah, you
it was
become another
fascinating.
person.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I want to share with you. At one point, the KGB wanted me to go into the United States the same way through Brazil. They weren't very explicit, but in hindsight, they made me study Portuguese and read up on the country of Brazil. Brazil, even today, makes it very easy to become a citizen. You just
Yeah.
you swear on a stack of Bibles and say where you're from, the documents that you have with you, and then you become a legal resident, and then you can become a citizen. Now, the difference between me and somebody who went through Brazil and Canada, the other favorite country that the KGB used to have, is that they still have a red flag attached to them. They came from another country. I was
Yeah.
born here.
Really?
Yes, I when I came to the U.S., entry point was Chicago O'Hare. I came with a forged passport, Canadian passport, uh, and but I had in my luggage sewn into one of the bags in a secret compartment a bona fide birth certificate of Jack Barsky, who had passed away at the age of 11. So I became Jack Barsky because age of 11 there was no real record of
Yeah.
in those days of a person period.
Was it
So
your responsibility once you got to the US? So obviously you had the forged documentation. I would assume you would dispose of that at some
oh
point in
yes,
time.
I burned it.
Was was it your responsibility then, once you had that birth certificate in the US, to rebuild that identity and get the other identification documents that you would need?
That is correct. That was my responsibility. I needed two documents in those days, and you still don't need more than two, except the Social Security card is impossible to obtain as an adult if you claim to have been born here, because you got your Social Security number at
Yep.
you get it at birth. In those days, uh, it was possible I was in my late 30s, according to Barsky's birth date, to get a Social Security number because uh, there were two sections of the population that were exempt from the Social Security law: farm workers and employees of religious organizations and churches. So
Interesting.
my backstory when I applied and I had to go for an interview at the Social Security office, and the lady looked at me and asked me, "So wait a minute, you don't have a Social Security card?" I said, "No." But don't you work? I said, "Yeah." Well, what do you do? Well, I spent most of my working life at Miller's Farm upstate in New York, someplace. I had the someplace in mind, obviously. I wouldn't have,
Yeah.
I didn't know it was that long. And yeah, okay. So she stamped, thank you, here we go.
Wow.
A huge security hole in the United States.
Hopefully we've tightened that one up a little bit.
And yeah. And the other thing is the driver's license. And the hardest part of getting a driver's license was parallel parking in New York.
I know the struggle. I get it.
So yeah, and with these two documents, I could function as a born American in the United States. I was
Oh, you could get your
supposed to get it.
passport. Yeah, you could get any
Yeah,
other federal document you wanted.
the plan was to get a passport, and that failed. It's a story. I don't want to start. I don't want to like give you long answers to short questions because because I could run away with this interview, and you would have to stop me because you have a bunch of questions that you want to ask. Just to tell you, uh, I made a mistake when applying for the passport, and it was denied. I got away with that denial, so nobody actually investigated me because that mistake could have put me in jail.
What was the mistake you made?
Well, I was honest about my profession. You were supposed to write what you're doing for work,
Yeah.
and then there were two uh, questions that were optional. When are you planning to travel, and where are you planning to go? And so I wrote honestly, and that was the mistake. I was a bike messenger at the time. A bike messenger made really, really good money, uh, because you can figure this out. Very dangerous job, highly recruited.
Mhm.
Uh, and I wrote messenger. That was the mistake because messengers were on minimum wage. So think about it. The clerk who reviewed this says, "Okay, here's a messenger who makes like $2.50 an hour. He doesn't know where he's going, and he doesn't know when he's going there. Bing, bing, bing." I mean, this guy didn't do his job. There should have been a red flag. At least it was a criminal who applied for a passport.
Yeah.
That didn't make any sense, right? And I got away with that.
Well, how'd you get into the espionage game to begin with? Let's go in the Wayback Machine. Is this? I'm fascinated by this world. I mean, how do you even get approached with this concept to begin with?
I can only tell you what I experienced, and with regard to approaching people that the KGB was considering for the illegals job. Most likely, it was very similar. But to suffice it to say, I never thought, never, not in my wildest dreams, had I thought that I would one day become a spy. I was going to become a college professor. My parents were both teachers. I like teaching still today. Uh, so I pieced this together because I got to tell you, the KGB, while I was with them, shared practically nothing with me. I
Hmm.
didn't even know that I was a part of the Directorate S. I had no idea what the structure of the KGB was. But a lot that information I acquired in hindsight, putting pieces together and reading up on on material that described how the KGB operated. So, but I tell you what happened to me, and it starts with a guess, but it it is known that in those days I was a citizen of East Germany, uh, was part of the Warsaw Pact, and an ally of the Soviet Union. And it is known that the Stasi, East German secret police, kept was very diligent in keeping records on practically every adult, good, bad, or indifferent. And my guess is that the KGB had access to some of those records because what was in my file was information that would have made any recruiters very, very interested. I had, and that was at the time when, just after having received the National Scholarship, Karl Marx scholarship, that was given there were only 100 concurrent holders in the entire country. So I was a superstar. I was an A student. Uh, Most likely, the recommendation to give me that scholarship was part of the file. So I had nothing but A's. I was active in the youth movement. I was a member of the Communist Party, and add to this that I also was in the starting lineup of the basketball team. And oh, by the way, when I was shown the application by the one who wrote it, and I told him that's not going to work, and I rewrote my own application. Uh, a lot of weird things in my life. So here's the KGB guy says, well, this guy, we got to talk to him. Well, and that's what they did.
Hmm.
They reached out to me initially with a German-speaking collaborator of the KGB who came to me on a Saturday, and I was sitting in my dorm room doing some work, my studies. And interestingly enough, he know he knew what door to knock on. There were no names, no nameplates. He also must have known that my roommate wasn't there on a Saturday. And many years later, it occurred to me we had a neighbor in the neighboring room who was a Russian exchange student,
There's some
KGB.
dots to connect here. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this fellow who came in, he made a lot of small talk and had a really idiotic backstory that didn't make any sense. He he indicated he wanted to recruit me to start after I'm done with my studies, when after I have my degree, to start working for the local optics firm called Siena, which is still known to
Hmm.
be one of the best optical companies on the planet, even
Yeah,
was
for
then.
sure.
Except in those days, uh, in East Germany, companies didn't recruit. You were you were assigned. everybody was assigned a position, except for when you were in the top 10%, you could go on and get your doctorate, and then you were assigned. So this guy didn't even know how his own country operated. But, never mind. He got an answer that, I was interested in. This was the question that he asked him at towards the end of our meeting, whether I would be he changed his tone. He said, but I have to apologize, I'm not really working for this cult-sized company. I'm working for the government. Can you imagine that one day to, uh, work for the government?" And I know that was another stupid question. I could have easily asked him what part of the government. That would have been normal, right? But, I gave him the answer to a question that he didn't ask, because I was curious,
Yeah.
at that point, I knew because he was German, I knew that he was East German intelligence, and I was interested in what they to do with me. So I said, "Yeah, but not as a chemist." So he had the answer. He knew that I was interested, and then he introduced me, the following week. We had, a dinner date. He introduced me to a fellow he introduced as Herman, and then he said, after he said, "Meet, Comrade Herman, we're working with our Soviet comrades." And then he said, "I gotta go." He disappeared. I never knew his name. I never knew his cover name. He Never saw him again. I
Yeah.
was like, the moment he disappeared, I knew I was interacting with a KGB agent.
Ladies and gentlemen, hot salt from Firecracker Farm is the real deal. It's not just heat, it's flavor that elevates everything that you cook. The best thing to happen to food since fire. That's a bold statement, but I'm going to go ahead and agree with that. It's delightful. One of the best things about this brand is there's a real person behind it. His name is Alex, and he makes these in small batches, so it's not always easy to get. You don't want to miss out. All of the flavors are great. I have tried all of them. You really can't go wrong. Seriously, try it on everything. Steaks, vegetables, everything in between. If you like milder heat, mix in some sea salt to dilute it. This is a choose your own adventure. You can go direct from the push button dispenser, or you can dilute to hit that flavor profile that you're looking for. The best way that you can help this show is to help Alex and his small family business by grabbing some hot salt and trying it for yourself. So go to Firecracker Farm and use the code Ironclad for 15% off of your first order. Alex would also like me to thank you, the audience, for giving his small business a shot. I'm telling you right now, head over to Firecracker Farm, pick something out. I honestly don't think that you can go wrong. It's an amazing product, founded by a very cool person. The backstory behind it is legit, and it's going to make your food taste better. What did they describe the job as? I mean, at some point they had to have told you what they wanted you to do. How
Yeah.
many interactions did it take till it got to that point?
Oh, 18 months.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. See, what they knew about me based on what was in the files, that I was smart, that I was most likely very ambitious, that I was athletic, and I was a communist, and I was a dedicated communist. That did not mean that I was qualified to operate as an undercover agent, because they were looking, because, Russians cannot get rid of their accent. So for Russians to become, illegals, I think it was fundamentally impossible. That's where the Americans is already off the ball wrong. So they were looking in the Baltic states, or like in Germany. A friend of mine, late friend of mine, he was a German citizen. He also operated as an illegal. So, they needed to figure out, what are my language capabilities? Uh, do I have problem am I risk tolerant, actually highly risk tolerant? Do I have a problem to disappear from my country, my family,
Mm-hmm.
job? Do I have a girlfriend? And all these things, they needed to really figure out, am I qualified for that job? Because it's incredibly demanding. That's not just me saying it. There's anybody who knows anything about intelligence. That's the most demanding job, because you're always by yourself.
Yeah.
You're not working. You're not. I never met a KGB agent physically while in the United States. I met them in other countries, but I was lonely, alone. So so there's this fellow who Herman, who I interacted with for 18 months. He gave me some things to do, some tests. I give you one example. You know what the word elicitation means?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Some people don't. That's why I have to ask. So, and also, I gotta explain to the people who listen. That is getting information out of somebody when they don't really know that they're spilling the beans. Uh, and so he told me there was an address, a single family home, and a family in there, and he told me that that family had a relative in the West, and they wanted he wanted Herman wanted me to find out if they have a good relationship and if and when this person may want to come visit because they didn't tell me that, I'm guessing that he was a target for recruitment most likely.
Hmm.
So I was really uncomfortable with doing this, but I came up with a way of doing it anyway. I pretended to be a sociology student, and I had a questionnaire. What's it called? The German. Once the German word pops into my head, the English is blocked. It's when you go around and ask people a bunch of questions. What is that?
I mean, you're talking about like a census
Yeah, no, not a census, but when you get when you opinions a survey, an opinion
survey.
survey.
Yep. Gotcha.
So I said I'm doing a survey for a study, and I had a bunch of questions written up. And clever as I was, and don't ever, I'm sorry, don't don't ever anybody tell me I'm not clever and inventive. Uh, I structured the questions in such a way that it eventually got to a point where the lady who answered the door um, volunteered some information that got me to we were just we started doing small talk, and I somehow managed to uh, get a friend of mine involved. I had an orange in my hands, and I says, "You know what? I'm really annoyed that this guy gets these care packets from the West, and thank you. He gave me an orange. I get nothing." And she said, "Well, we get them too. That's great." And so then it went down to the point that she told me that her cousin is going to visit one day. So I passed that test.
Yeah.
And I never used by that technique, by the way, in real life. And I think what sealed the deal for there were a couple of other tests, and we talked a lot about what it would be like uh, to operate as an illegal. And one more thing that was important, very important. Herman was of the proper age. He was a nice man. I liked him, and my dad was out of the picture in my life. So I treated him I shared everything with him. I opened up to him.
Yeah.
I hid nothing. And, so I bet you he went in his notes says he's very, very honest, trustworthy. And so I was going to say what sealed the deal. In end of a junior year, my friend and I went hitchhiking from East Germany to the Black Sea coast of Bulgaria. That was one heck of an adventure. There was no GPS. There weren't a lot of private vehicles, so hitchhiking was like a guessing game.
Yeah.
And we had to go through several countries, the language of which we did not understand. And we had only like 4 to 5 days to get through Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Romania, and limited amount of money. So it was an adventure into the unknown, and we made it through. Uh, that sort of gave an idea that this guy can find his way.
Yeah. You can problem solve.
Yes, absolutely. So, and I again, this is in hindsight. He one day um, when we had our sessions, I guarantee you, he would write notes down to you know document the sessions, and he had a pile of them. And eventually, I guess headquarters in Berlin asked him, or he volunteered. He sent all this stuff to headquarters, and as a result, I got an invitation to go to Berlin again under a pretext. They told me he told me that we you need a little more training. Well, okay, and they gave me uh, a forged document that I could show the university that I was unable to participate in any activities. There was some East German military general or whatever. It looked official. So I
Mhm.
spent a week in Berlin. I got some training, but the very last day of that training, I found out while I was there because I was taken to the headquarters of the Soviet Army in East Berlin, and that was also headquarters of the KGB. I was led into an office that was as richly decorated as I've ever seen an office. It 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 screamed high level, and the person behind the desk there was a short man, but when he opened his mouth, it screamed high level. His 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 tone was metallic and stentorian. He spoke only Russian. Whatever he said, and I understood most of it because we had a lot of Russian in middle school, high school, and college. And he started out with small talk, and I'm thinking, why am I here? Small talk? Well, he told me at one point he interrupted the small talk abruptly, and I believe this is a interrogation technique when you suddenly change the topic and
Yep.
ask the tough question, so you don't give the interrogatee, the person who you want to give an honest answer, a chance to think.
Yeah, you catch
So
them
he
off
asked me,
guard.
"So what are you in or not?" And I was not prepared for that question. So I managed to play a little bit on for time. I said, "Well, uh, I can't make that decision because A, I know I need more training. B, I don't know if I'm really qualified." And then he said, "Well, don't worry about that. We know that you're qualified and we will give you all the training you want. But we only work with people who can make important decisions very quickly. So I give you until tomorrow noon to give me an answer." Now, here's one thing I wanted to comment in hindsight. He didn't give me the choice. He didn't say, "Well, I give you until noon to say yes or no." That no should have come out of me if I had it in me.
Yeah.
Okay. And people ask, was it possible to get away with a no and go back to university? 100%. You don't you don't punish somebody for not doing something that if they said yes to, they would fail because you really need to want to do it. So when I said yes, I at that point, even though it was touch and go, but at that point I really wanted to do it and I said yes.
So so you say yes, they decide that they are going to get you into the United States. This is one of the things that was a little bit illuminated in the conversation with the journalist about Brazil. There was no guarantee, let's say they went to a Western country, there was no guarantee that those illegals would necessarily land metaphorically somewhere in proximity to something that would be important or sensitive. They might not necessarily have access and placement to anything that was important. So is this more? I mean, it's a long game for sure, but it just seems like they're kind of putting pieces out on the field, and they expect the piece to do the best they can possible to maneuver towards what they may think is important, or were they trying to direct you on what they wanted you to report on? How did that work?
Well, I give you an answer for a question you didn't ask, but I got to give you some background. Uh, when the KGB, when the Soviet Union fell apart, the KGB was dissolved. There were a couple of ex directors of the department. It's not department, but the not the Russian word doesn't come into it, but it was a department of the KGB. Uh, uh, the Department S illegals that a couple of the heads of the Department S gave interviews, and they said in no uncertain terms the value that we illegals had, the number one, the most important value was our existence in the United States. Okay, for two
Hmm.
reasons. The Cold War was heating up. That
Yep.
was that was a fact in the late 80s, and there was a chance of a war, a hot war, with fought with missiles and
Yeah.
weapons and
Kinetic
so
war.
forth. And at that point, there was no more espionage presence in the United States other than us, the illegals, right? And the other thing was, if there was also this warfare between the CIA and the KGB. Uh, in those days, other than us illegals, the only KGB spies in the U.S. were diplomats. There were no, like nowadays, there were no exchange students. There were no business people. There were no artists. There were no NOCs, non-official cover agents.
Hmm.
These are people who go under their own identity and spy on the side, right? We didn't have him. So if diplomatic relations were broken up, and there was a good chance, Andropov, the head of the KGB at the time, was afraid that diplomatic diplomatic relations would be broken up altogether, then the only espionage presence for the KGB was us. So we were the insurance policy. Now, I wasn't told that either. Okay, I was told, by the way, you will be in charge of finding of befriending people who are making foreign policy decisions, or like people who work for think tanks who influence foreign policy.
Okay.
That is what I was what was shared with me, but I found out based on these interviews that wasn't all. Eventually, I would have gotten some kind of instruction, but I have no idea what that would have been. Yeah, and I was tasked um, to befriend people who work in, say, in the State Department, for instance, or in some place where foreign policy is made. Um, that was not a bad plan, except for the fact that a bike messenger really can't doesn't have a reason to like show up at Columbia University and say hello to Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Yeah, they're different social orbits and ecosystems for sure.
Yes, and the Soviets didn't really have much of a clue about that. Now, the the plan was for me to do that first job for a while, get my passport, uh, emigrate, get the passport, immigrate to say Switzerland or Austria, open a company, and the KGB was very good at money laundering. The plan was to funnel a lot of money into that company, and then I could come back to the United States with, let's say, $500,000.
Hmm.
That's sort of like the equivalent of more than $1 million, and that kind of money would allow me to join a country club.
It
Hopefully,
opens
one
other
that's
doors for you. Yeah.
yeah, hopefully one that's close to the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Where you can make friends easily. Except I already told you, the application for the passport was denied, so we had to go with Plan B, and Plan B and eventually had me go to college and then get a job as a computer programmer. So I never really managed to gather intelligence on foreign policy, and and I wasn't considered a failure because in my eighth year of being undercover in the U.S., the Soviet Union awarded me the second highest decoration that they gave out in those days, the Order of the Red Banner. That uh, to just put this in perspective, two of the atomic spies, famous atomic spies, they were members of the Rosenberg spy ring, who retired uh, in the United States. They were American citizens. Were Morris and Lana Cohen got the same decoration. So
Wow.
it puts in perspective how important it was for the KGB and the Soviet Union to have us live in the U.S. like as foreign bodies.
If you had to guess at peak levels, how many illegals do you think there were in the U.S.?
Um, in during the Cold War,
Yeah.
I don't really have to guess very much. There's a book that anybody who is interested in real information about the KGB. It's called The Sword and the Shield. That is based on information that was smuggled out by a KGB archivist, who eventually managed to hand it over to MI6. And there was a book written based on all these notes. He smuggled out this information over a long period of time, and that is arguably the greatest or the second greatest intelligence coup in the history of intelligence. The first being the theft of the atomic secret.
Yeah. And the Manhattan Project.
Second one is this one. Sorry. So, and in that there's a chapter. There's a couple of chapters, but in there's a passage where this fellow shares with the readers that in the mid to late 80s, the KGB recruited and trained a dozen of us.
Hmm.
It doesn't say how many were deployed. It doesn't say how many were successfully deployed. I guarantee you at least half of them failed. This job, I should have failed a number of times. I just got lucky. And I was pretty good as well, but a couple of times I made mistakes that could have landed me in jail. So I know of one. I mentioned a friend of mine who became a late friend. That was another German who did not fail. He came to the U.S. As an illegal and didn't have any task. By the way, they just told him just like get a job and and he worked for Columbia University as an IT expert. So
Wow.
the answer to give you the answer to the original question, it's not a guess. Maybe 5.
Wow.
You don't want to back away from that. I fight on always.
Scene 101A, take 3.
If you're prepared for the worst case scenarios, those worst case scenarios are gonna be manageable.
I got out because we weren't at war. We're at war. I'm going back.
I want to quit like anybody else. I just have the mentality I don't.
I thought I knew what pain was up until that moment.
Accuracy is by far the most important thing.
This community aided in who I am. It gave me family.
Don't fail it's everything. It's a way of life.
All right, action.
What was it like living that life? I know eventually, and we'll get to that, the FBI came knocking on your door, which is probably a story in and of itself. But
Yeah.
up until that point, what was it like? I mean, how much time would you spend just living your everyday life versus reminding yourself that you were here for a greater mission at that time?
No, everyday life was the majority. I had to become a normal citizen, and I had a situation. I had a complaint that I got a radio transmission, shortwave radio, encrypted Morse code every Thursday at the same time. And I complained to the KGB that this was not a good idea because it established a pattern that on Thursday evening I was not available. And they said, well, tough luck, we can't change that. Apparently they rented some time at a Cuban radio station, because they were not in control.
Time slots
right?
are killers. You get the time you get.
That's right. So lot of just quote unquote normal life. It wasn't normal as a bike messenger. I couldn't really, because I was way too obviously intelligent
For the job.
to pull that off.
Yeah.
Because even the more intelligent people, they were all transients. They dressed funny. I could not impersonate that kind of a character. So when I went to college after 2.5 years of doing the bike messenger work, and I could, by the way, pay for my own tuition. The KGB didn't have to give me any money. Then I started living normal life, but normal most of the time I study and I interact. I socialize a little bit, and that was it. The weekends typically, I communicated. I got my information through the shortwave radio, and I wrote reports back using secret writing in airmail letters, and typically I was allowed to write 2 of those letters per month. So every other Saturday, the time was for dedicated to espionage. Just all of that was in communication. The other thing that was also espionage, it was part of my socializing with people. They really were interested in what Americans think about important events, such upcoming elections and world affairs, with stuff that happened in the world that was known to everybody. The one example I always give is when the Soviet Air Force shot down a civilian Korean airliner.
Yeah.
And they wanted to know what Americans think about that. That was the only time I openly criticized the Soviet Union. I told them, "What the heck were you doing? This is like this is killing détente."
Yeah.
So anyway, not a lot of time to spend on espionage activities, except when it was natural. I also was supposed to. There was another task. To make as many contacts, meet as many people as possible. The label for that is work as a spot talent. People who might be targets for recruitment, and meet people, profile them if I thought they were recruitment material. So I, particularly during my time in college, I profiled maybe a dozen of college students, primarily because of the ideological bent. Because in those days, the KGB liked to recruit primarily people who are ideologically driven.
Yeah.
That sticks longer. If you do it for money, there's somebody who could pay more. If you're forced into this, you find a lot of ways to get out of it. You're familiar with the acronym MICE?
Maybe.
Okay, MICE is the acronym that people in the FBI and the CIA, everybody in intelligence uses. Acronym for how you recruit people. M is for money, I is for ideology, C is for coercion, E is for ego, and there's one letter that didn't fit into the acronym, but that's a extremely powerful reason why people would be subject to recruitment, and that's love. particularly love not necessarily for self, but love for, let's say, a family member, somebody who is ill, somebody who needs money
Yeah.
to get healing. That doesn't fit into the acronym. But anyway, so I recruited people who were sympathetic to communism or socialism, at least. I didn't recruit them. I just
Assessed
profiled them,
them. Yeah.
assessed them. That's right. And one other thing I want to talk about. And one other activity I was engaged in, but it was rare. Maybe in 8 years, 10 years, about 5 or 6 dead drop operations. The first one was to get me money because when I came to the U.S., I had no job. I needed some money to live on,
Yeah.
and the travel money was gone. And there were 3 others to get a passport and travel money to get back to Moscow for some debriefing and some rest and relaxation. And those operations lasted nothing but I would say at worst an afternoon. Oh, one more thing I have to tell you. When I talk about Saturday, not only did I write the message in secret writing, that took quite a bit of preparation to get it right. I also had to decrypt some information like names and addresses. And then I had to go on the surveillance detection route before I put the letter in a post box, and that was typically 3 to 4 hours running around in the city.
Yeah.
And occasionally I was supposed to do that for no reason. And that sometimes like it was too much. I skipped them after a while. I got you know a little bit
Complacent.
cocky. Yeah, complacent. That's typical. So the and the and surveillance detection route, I absolutely did before I went for a dead drop operation. But when I had this is when it gets really interesting. When I had my job as a computer programmer, I graduated from college. I got a programmer job, and I loved doing this. Logic, creating stuff, getting immediate feedback of whether you did it right or wrong. I just like it was like a dream job. And I worked overtime. I had night calls. I was dedicated to that job. And at one point I was thinking, I wish I didn't have to do the other stuff. So the reason that they sent me to the US got in the way of doing the job that I liked. So there's a lot of irony involved here.
Yeah.
And the other thing that also occurred when the company I work for MetLife, and that's knowledge. It's in my book. I work for MetLife, and they treated their employees very well, and it felt good. It felt almost like being, working for a communist institution, like the government, so to speak. And the colleagues, I worked in a department with about 40, 45 people, and about 20 of them were computer guys, and the majority, almost all, with one exception, all of the other computer guys were not born in the United States. There was this one friend of mine and me who were born in the U.S., and it felt really good, there were several Russians, a Ukrainian, uh, uh, there's a third one, American born, a black guy, uh, somebody from China. It was like the United Nations, and I felt good. And I said, one of those days, a thought popped into my head and said, I'm going to miss the job, but I also going to miss these guys. So you see the slight degradation of my ideological foundation.
Yeah. Well, and then how did the FBI end up knocking on your door one day? How did you get on their radar?
The guy that smuggled out the information out of the KGB archives, his name is Vasily Mitrokin, and the book is called The Sword and the Shield. Anybody who really wants to know authentic stuff, information about how the KGB operated in intelligence during the Cold War, that is the Bible. It's not an easy read unless you really want, because they're facts after facts after facts. It's not storytelling.
Yeah.
But I would recommend this to anybody who is interested in that. And so, as part of the notes that he shared with MI6, there was just a brief a notice that says there is a fellow by the name of Barsky. He didn't have the first name, who lives as an illegal in the northeast of the United States. Lucky for the FBI and ultimately lucky for me, there aren't too many Barskys in the U.S. even today. So they went through Social Security files and found there was a Jack Barsky living in rural Pennsylvania. And so they figured they had their man. And so then they started watching me, because what was not known is whether I was still active. What was not known, that I was not a Russian citizen. There was a good chance that Russian citizens, actually, if they're still in the U.S. as illegals, might continue working for Russia, right? So they didn't know any of that. They just knew that I was highly trained because I had survived. At that point, I was in the country for like 19 years, undetected. They knew I was highly trained, and they didn't know whether I was active. So if this highly trained person is active, he will find a way to discover whether he's under investigation or not. Some of that was training, surveillance detection. Some of that was, my own way of checking whether, for instance, my apartment was ransacked, was subject to investigation, and it's not the proverbial piece of hair over the
very movie-esque.
Yeah, no, but something similar. If somebody were to open the drawer of this desk, I would know that it was opened. And I had a drawer that you had to know that that you had to know that it had a ledge that covered the drawer itself. So you had to reach and if there was a ledge, the only way you could discover the ledge is you have to bend down and look at the drawer, the whole chest from the bottom. And every time that when I came home from wherever I was, I checked that the ledge was exactly 8 millimeters open. Okay, so if somebody opened that, they most likely would have closed it all the way.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right?
Yep.
So, and I'm just telling you, kudos to the FBI, because they were very, very, very cautionary. Observed me from a distance, eventually managed to get into my house because they waited for me to step into my vehicles, and they followed vehicle with my family, and they followed me all the way to the Canadian border. And when I crossed the Canadian border, they knew that I wouldn't be home for a while. And so they went through my apartment, found nothing, obviously. They found some money, but I had saved that money to buy my wife, save money for an engagement ring that I didn't have the money for when we got married. And so there were alarm bells went on, saying, "Oh my God, maybe that's escape money." Kudos to them again. They found that. I thought there was hidden very nicely, but they found it. Anyway, they eventually decided to say hello. When they were in my house, they installed a listening device. So they were now listening to the conversation that my wife and I had in the kitchen. And then one day we had an argument, and my wife always was, she was very distrustful. She was very jealous. She thought I had affairs with other women. Never did. And so it went back and forth, and she went angry, and I just decided to use what I call the nuclear option. And I told her, listen, I will never leave you. I will never betray you. I love you and our child. And I tell you, and I have proof for saying that. And then I told her that I was an agent and refused the order to return back to Moscow because I wanted to stay with Chelsea and her. Okay, that backfired. First of all, now she knew that I was an ex-agent. Now I was even less trustworthy. So on a personal level, it backfired. And then while I was telling Penelope, my ex-wife's name, this story about my background, there was somebody in an FBI office who listened, who I just like admitted, yeah, I was. And they had enough evidence that I loved my children, right, based on how I interacted with them, how I spoke with them in the kitchen, and how I played with them, to indicate that that I would most likely be cooperative, and I shouldn't be arrested, but just detained and asked to cooperate, and that's what they did. And again, this is in my book. It was disclosed to me and by the fellow who was the lead agent on my case. That this wasn't, he didn't violate his order to keep things secret, because there was a lot of things that I also shared with 60 Minutes in my first interview that, I was allowed to do that. I asked the FBI if they were okay with me in interviewing, and that's okay. What needs to be secret stays secret, and there's things that I cannot talk about, and there's things that this ex-agent cannot talk about. But this stuff is now public knowledge. So they decided to say hello. It was very elegantly constructed. You want to know how it worked?
Sure.
So they hired themselves as a volunteer, a state police officer in uniform, and they knew that my daily commute had me go from New Jersey into Pennsylvania on the over the Delaware, and that was a toll bridge. So you must slow down and come to a stop. This was coins only.
Yeah.
Okay, so you must come to a stop to put a couple of quarter in a slot. And then at that point, the officer planted himself in front of me, and he waved me over, and he said, routine traffic stop. Please step out of the vehicle. Now, if I'm still active and alert, I knew that was a problem. That was not a routine traffic stop. He didn't ask me for a license and insurance,
yeah,
and registration, right? So I step out, just not even thinking about anything, but then I noticed from my right, I hear some footsteps, and there's this fellow in civilian clothes, interestingly, comes up to me, and he flips open an ID. I didn't have to look at the ID. At that point, I knew what that meaning was. And that was arguably the biggest shock I ever had in my entire life. Totally unprepared. I was so sure that I was safe. I would live out my life in the shadows. I would pass away as Jack Barsky, never go back to Germany, not talk to the FBI. I was afraid I would go to jail, and my family would uh, would be subject to some damage, including deportation for the ex-wife who became a citizen based because I I married her. That's why. So I was afraid of doing any of that, and all of and I had like pretty much uh put the fact that I had once was a German and illegal for the KGB into the remote part of my brain, never to come back, not never to bring back. Well, and that moment brought everything back, like being dosed with gallons of ice cold water.
So
I
how do you unwind? So you're approached by the FBI, you agreed to collaborate with them. How do you eventually unwind your relationship with the KGB? Like, how do you stop becoming an illegal?
Oh, that was I quit.
How, I mean, do you just send them a letter like I quit? Or
Yes, I did. But I didn't say I quit. But I came up with the second biggest lie in my entire life. And everybody who hears it said, brilliant, brilliant. This was the time when HIV/AIDS was a death sentence.
Yep.
Anybody who caught it would die. No exceptions. There was some medication that could relieve the symptoms, but eventually you bite the dust. So, and my motivation was for quitting when they ordered me back home. Time's up. You got to go. It's we have indication to believe that you're under investigation, and so under normal circumstances, I would have said, "Yay, time to go home and get the benefits of having received the second highest decoration of the Soviet Union, having been promised that eventually they would donate me a house, a private house, and having the knowledge that I would continue working for the KGB and travel in the West and like live the life of Riley, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
But, and here's the big but, and I'm so grateful that this became an and. I had an 18-month-old daughter at the time that they called me back, and I it was a sneaky attack. I was not aware of it, of unconditional love. And I tell most men that I share that with, and I tell them, I ask them, do you have daughters? Don't don't you remember that you loved your little daughters more than you loved your wife? Most of them say, yeah.
Yeah.
Because your wife, you want something back, but this little child, all she could get back to me was a smile, and that was it, nothing else. So it's unconditional, and that is the strongest emotion that I've ever experienced in my entire life. So I risk the fact that they were right with regard to thinking that I was being investigated, or that they would interpret my quote unquote resignation as a defection and would come after me. I risked all of that to stay with this child. And it worked. Thank God I'm still here, right? And so in my final letter in secret writing, I told him, I appreciate your concern about me. I would gladly come back, but I phrased it in a selfish manner. I said, the only country I have HIV/AIDS, and I traced it back to make it credible to a girlfriend that I had to report on all the girlfriends that I had. They wanted to know, who I interacted with intimately. And I traced it back to one of the girlfriends who actually had a boyfriend before, who had come down with HIV/AIDS. He was a drug addict. And I told him I caught it from her. I have HIV/AIDS, and the only way that I could possibly hope for some treatment is in the US. Well, they bought that lie hook, line, and sinker. They had no reason not to believe it, because all they knew about me was that everything that was good for me was over there. The the Berlin Wall was still up. Communism, my country, was still in existence. and they knew that, that didn't make any sense for me other than having this forcing reason, HIV/AIDS, to stay here. And they told my German family that I had died from HIV/AIDS. And believe it or not, in the German social records, my German name is listed as having passed away in 1988. It has not been cleaned up.
Wow. How did you spend the rest of your life after that, once you were free and clear of the KGB? Did you just live your life as a normal man?
Yeah, I kept on living exactly the way I lived during the final years working for the KGB. I focused on a career. First thing I did is buy a house, and then I started working on the American dream. I wanted to take care of my family. I loved this child. I liked the woman. I wasn't crazy in love with her, but I could take care of her.
Yeah.
Two women, two females. So I bought the house, and then I bought another house, and I got a promotion. And I bought another house. Eventually, I wound up with a McMansion, but that was well after the FBI hooked up with me. They found me while I was living in my second house, but I was focused on, making as much money as possible, and as I said, I wound up with a McMansion with a pool and a waterfall for my last house. So I was upper middle class comfortably.
Yeah.
And that's all I wanted to do, live my life out like that. And I think I shared this with me before we started recording. And, I was going to retire with $2-3 million easily. And then, and travel around the United States and maybe the world and live out my life in peace.
Yeah.
Well, none of that actually happened. I'm still working.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
That's okay. I'm not complaining. I actually, I love what I'm doing. I get to do what I'm really good at. Yeah, I got to write my memoir. It's called Deep Undercover. I didn't know that I'm a really good writer until I had to sit down and write it. And I get to speak in public. And I realized when I finally acquired the skill, I wasn't born with that skill, but when I finally got really good, I love it. I love to be on stage. I love to entertain people. That's in my blood. So this is not really work where you say, thank God it's Friday.
Yeah.
It's a hobby that allows me to make money and take care of my youngest daughter, who is only 14 years old.
Yep. Those are the best jobs.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, where can people find your book? I want to be respectful of your time.
The book is on Amazon primarily. There's an audiobook version and a paperback version. There are some bookstores that carry it, but I no sense in mentioning those because
for the global audience, it's better. Amazon reaches just about everywhere. So
yeah, and if I may volunteer, if they want to reach out to me, LinkedIn, just you will find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I have a website, jackbarsky.com, and I interact also based on what's on that website. But I'm daily on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, Jack, thank you so much for your time and your insight, and thank you for telling me that story. It's awesome. Like I said, really weird timing to be able to talk with a reporter about that program, and then literally 24 hours later talk with somebody who was embedded in that program. Thank you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original, presented by Firecracker Farm. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode and an all-new guest. See you then.